So there is a lot to like about the iPhone 14 Pro. After using this phone as my daily driver for the past 3 weeks, I've come to realize that this is a pretty good phone with some great features and nice little upgrades from older generations. Yet, it's not the phone most people should be getting. Sure, it looks nice and is built very well. There's no doubt about that. I can certainly appreciate the matte finish glass on the back and the stainless steel frame. These two things alone make this phone feel so much more premium than most phones out there. Especially the stainless steel frame, because it makes this phone feel heavier, so it just feels dense and solid. And because it's also harder than aluminum, which is what most phones use, technically, this is one of the most durable flagship phones you can buy. In fact, it's also one of the most water-resistant phones you can buy because it has an IP6A water and dust-resistant rating of up to 6 meters underwater for 30 minutes, which is still considered an IP6A rating, but it's way better than just the basic IP6A rating of up to 1.5 meters underwater for 30 minutes. But despite all of that, it still looks and feels like an iPhone. If you used an iPhone before, this will feel very similar, and especially from the back because you only really see the biggest changes on the front of this phone. And of those, the biggest one is this dynamic island. Not only is this the most visually different thing about this phone, but it's also the only truly new feature this phone has. And not just compared to iPhones, but all phones in general. And honestly, I like it. Instead of just leaving this part of the screen useless and having a black static spot on the screen at all times, Apple made it into a whole new feature. And the way they did it is also kind of smart because it's a big part of the whole UI of this phone. A lot of things happen on this island. For example, you'll see various system animations like the Face ID animation or the charging animation, and any live or ongoing tasks like navigation or maybe a timer running in the background also kind of get minimized on this island if you leave that particular app. Plus, if you long tap the island, depending on the app that's there, it may expand and show you more options. So you can also interact with it. But the thing is, I barely find myself using this dynamic island. I may use it occasionally, maybe when streaming music or something, but otherwise it's there, it does its thing, whatever. I don't care much about it. In fact, in some cases, this is actually worse than just the good old notch because in landscape, almost half of it cuts into YouTube videos with a 2:1 aspect ratio, which does not look nice. Other than that, the only thing that's new is this always on display, which you may have noticed by now. This is a feature new to iPhones only. And now that Apple has added the option to turn off the wallpaper and just have a black screen with the time showing, I think it's way better. But there is still a problem with this, and I'll get to that in a minute. Otherwise, in pretty much every other aspect, this phone has the same screen as the iPhone 13 Pro from last year. They're both 6.1-inch 1440p LTPO OLED displays. Both are capable of showing 120Hz. The brightness, however, is the only exception because this screen can go all the way up to 2000 nits of brightness versus 1200 on the iPhone 13 Pro. And this certainly makes a difference. The screen gets super bright, making it easier to see outdoors, even directly under sunlight, which is quite impressive. Similar to this beautiful website that I created in like 3 hours from scratch without even writing a single line of code. I literally just picked from one of these award-winning templates, drag and dropped some images, typed some text, connected my domain, and published the site. It's that easy. Now, if I want, I can run email campaigns, access analytics, or take full advantage of the built-in SEO tools to maximize prominence in search results. All thanks to Squarespace, an all-in-one, easy-to-use platform to build professional-looking websites for any kind of business or any kind of online presence. So check out squarespace.com/Spixel to try it out yourself and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or even a domain. And thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, now on this phone, you also get a 48 megapixel main wide angle camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 3x telephoto camera. They're all in this massive camera bump. It's just huge in every dimension. In fact, it's even bigger than the 40mm Apple Watch SE. Yeah. But the photos and videos from these cameras look nice and sharp. They're detailed with good contrast, good dynamic range, accurate colors, and the results are consistent when switching between cameras. Night mode shots also look really good, especially from the main camera due to it having a big sensor that can capture a lot of light. Same goes for the ultra wide angle camera. It takes some great shots as well. And now that it has autofocus, it can also be used as a macro camera, and a pretty good one actually. You can take some photos with details that you normally wouldn't see with your eyes, which is pretty cool. There's also no shutter lag. Photos are captured pretty much instantly. But honestly, the most exciting thing about these cameras is all the pro features you get, such as raw photos, which are basically like unedited photos. So when you take a photo, they get saved without pretty much any post-processing, which is good if you plan on editing them later because it gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot more information to work with since the photos don't get compressed. You can also take raw photos in 48 megapixel from the main camera instead of just 12 megapixels. And although these photos have more detail, it does take a second or two for the phone to save them. And that's probably probably because their file sizes are quite large, like 80 megabytes versus 5 megabytes for a normal JPEG. But with the main camera, you also get a pretty good natural bokeh. For example, these are not portrait mode photos, but the background is still quite blurry, which makes these photos look a lot more like photos shot from a professional camera. And it doesn't end there. This year, the main camera also has a 24mm focal length instead of 26mm, which is what older iPhones had. Now, this matters because in the professional world, 24mm is a common focal length for wide angle shots, especially for video. So for example, something like this. I'm shooting at roughly 24mm right now. So if I wanted to film this video on this phone, I can easily match this focal length. Speaking of video though, videos shot on this phone also look nice. You can film normal video or you can film in 4K up to 30 frames per second in cinematic mode, which is basically like portrait mode video. There's also an action mode and you do have the option to film in ProRes. However, it takes up way too much space, not to mention the slow and tedious process of transferring large files from your iPhone to your computer, thanks to the lightning port. So I didn't really end up using it. Last but not least, the selfie camera also takes good photos, and now it also has autofocus. But the 14 Pro is also the first iPhone to have a different processor than its non-Pro variant. So this phone has the latest and greatest A16 Bionic processor. The normal 14, however, still has a 1-year-old A15 Bionic processor, which is also what the iPhone 13 had. Now on paper, the A16 Bionic is like 7% faster, but if I'm being completely honest with you, I've used all of these phones, 13, 14, 14 Pro, and I could not tell the difference. It's simply not noticeable, especially when you're just separately using these phones and not doing like a side-by-side speed test or anything like that. So just like the 14, this phone can also handle graphically intensive tasks like photo or video editing or even gaming with ease, no problems whatsoever. And of course, it's also perfect for all everyday tasks like browsing, watching videos, scrolling through social media, and stuff like that. You shouldn't have any problems. Additionally, this phone will also continue to get updates for the next 5 to 6 years, just like the iPhone 14 will. But here's the thing, while you are getting the latest and greatest tech inside this phone, you can't forget that a lot of those things impact the battery life. And that's where this phone takes a hit. There's a 3200 milliamp hour battery inside this phone versus the 3279 milliamp hour battery inside the iPhone 14. So this phone literally has a physically smaller battery than the cheaper non-Pro model iPhone. And that's just disappointing because this phone has features that use more battery, like 120 Hz, the faster processor, the significantly better screen, and even the always-on display. These are all the things the iPhone 14 does not have. So, of course, the battery life of this phone is not as good as my expectations. I'm usually able to get around 7 to 8.5 hours of screen on time, which to be fair is not bad battery life, don't get me wrong, but it's also about the same as what you would get on an iPhone 14 and even the 13. So those two phones are much better value than this phone for most people because let's be honest, how many of the pro features of this phone truly matter for an average consumer? Basically none, right? For an average consumer, the best phone is the phone that doesn't lag, takes good photos, doesn't cost too much, and lasts all day. The iPhone 13 and 14 perfectly fit that description. Why would you buy this phone? Well, if you're like me, so you just want that 120 Hz screen or maybe a better set of cameras, which is not the majority of people. Hence, this is not the phone most people should be getting. Now, with that being said, if you genuinely need some of the pro features of this phone and the best battery life, then perhaps you should be looking at the 14 Pro Max. Or alternatively, you want to wait a few months for the iPhone 15 lineup and then decide which one to buy. By then, these phones will also get cheaper. So maybe that's something to note too. But anyways, that's all for this video. If you found it helpful, consider subscribing, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you later.